you note Congress should focus on strengthening the domestic nuclear fuel cycle and ensure timely development of mining, conversion, enrichment, and advanced fuel capabilities. Can you discuss how the American Enrichment Deployment Act will help streamline the licensing and construction process under the Atomic Energy Act to expand our enrichment capacity in a safe and secure manner? And I will let you turn that in because my time is out. So thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from California is now recognized for at least 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the witnesses for being here today. I'd like to continue the line of questioning started by my colleague from California regarding nuclear waste. I also have a nuclear power plant that was actually shut down over 30 years ago. It's in Sacramento, California, but the spent fuel is still there because the U.S. government has failed to implement an effective nuclear waste program. And I'm really disappointed that we're having this hearing today without considering legislation that would advance an effective federal nuclear waste program. Now, many of my colleagues on this committee believe that recycling will solve the waste problem for us, but it remains to be seen whether recycling or spent nuclear fuel will scale in the United States. And even if nuclear recycling does take off, it won't fully eliminate the waste problem. Now, I support the continuing development of nuclear recycling, but this can't be another excuse to kick the can down the road on a federal nuclear waste program. Now, Dr. Huff, can you explain some of the economic and technological challenges to scaling nuclear recycling in the United States?
Thank you, Congresswoman. You're right. Recycling does have real promise. It's not simple. I hope that it will become a part of a comprehensive waste management plan. In the United States, we have over 90,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel, making 2,000 more metric tons every year. The current most mature recycling facility in the world at La Hague in France manages to run through a capacity of recycling about 1,700 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel a year. So if you're doing the math, that means that that facility, if it were deployed at that scale here, wouldn't quite make it through our annual amount. So we are going to have to think really big with any recycling capacity, and even those strategies result in spent nuclear fuel, which also must be managed. So it is no replacement for a spent nuclear fuel strategy, but it could really benefit.
Okay, so we still need a comprehensive federal waste program even under this scenario, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that correct? Okay. Now, earlier this year, the Department of Energy announced plans to support so-called nuclear life cycle innovation campuses, which would host recycling, fuel fabrication, and waste disposal activities. Dr. Huff, if these sites were doing recycling at scale, they'd have to store waste before processing, and they still have to deal with the leftover waste after recycling. At what point does that become an interim storage facility?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Your insight is correct. It would be immediately an interim storage facility. And in fact, I think a good, reasonable strategy that has merit would be to begin such a facility as an interim storage facility and build adjacent to it such recycling strategies. This would immediately reduce the liability on the order of $1 billion a year to the U.S. federal government, which we pay in the nuclear waste
Right.
fund. Yeah.
Okay. So under what circumstances and for what activities would the Nuclear Waste Policy Act need to be amended to construct any of these sites?
Yeah, at the moment, there is a linkage between the licensing of a repository and an interim storage facility being constructed. And so there does need to be a look at the Nuclear Waste Policy Act.
Okay. The standard waste contract prioritizes oldest fuel and fuel from shut down reactors. If these recycling sites are being supported by the federal government, do you believe these sites should prioritize spent fuel from shut down plants?
At the moment, I think they should certainly follow the law. I think it is the case that many recycling companies may prefer feedstock from more recently discharged fuel. From the physics alone, many of our more recent spent nuclear fuel discharges have higher initial enrichment and longer burnup. Both of those tend to contribute to a higher total fissile equivalent inventory, which makes it better fuel.
better, so even this is not really a good solution here at all, in a sense, for the spent nuclear fuel. So we might have to figure that part of it out, but if we can somehow prioritize some of this old spent nuclear fuel, it would be wonderful. So anyway, I think my time is moving up, and so I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Tennessee is recognized for at least 5 minutes.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to members for being here today, and thank you for your expertise in this area. This is very important. You know, the legislation we're considering today will build upon the success of the ADVANCE Act, and it's going to help meet our nation's growing energy needs. For example, the American Enrichment Deployment Act discussion drafts meant to help restart our domestic uranium enrichment capabilities. And there are several companies, including BWXT, which is in my district, are already working to restore this critical national capability. So, Mr. Merrifield and Ms. Korsnick, how does enabling faster builds and licensing of enrichment facilities impact our energy security posture?
We have a critical need for additional enrichment, particularly as it relates to high assay, low enriched uranium, which is what many of these reactors will require. And so that legislation would streamline the licensing process in a way and allow construction to begin earlier, which would facilitate closing that gap.
Exactly. Ms. Korsnick?
Yeah, I would agree with that. We're in the process through a lot of your good leadership in really focusing on enrichment on the front end of the fuel cycle. It just all takes time. And so it's just nice if we have some of this flexibility that's outlined in the American Enrichment Deployment Act to allow construction to a point before the licensing is received.
Yeah. You know, I'd like to turn the discussion draft relating to the Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards. And Ms. Korsnick and Mr. Merrifield, you each have direct experience with this. Mr. Merrifield, you've seen both sides as a licensing process and as an attorney and as an NRC commissioner. Ms. Korsnick, you're not only at the helm of the NEI, you served as chief nuclear officer for the largest fleet of nuclear reactors in the nation, which is pretty stealthy. So based on your experience, does NRC staff routinely evaluate highly technical safety and risk significant issues as part of the agency's licensing and regulatory responsibilities?
Oh, absolutely. The NRC staff is technically very competent, very
Yeah.
strong, and absolutely goes through many technical issues. The conversation that played out earlier on the ACRS, again, it's a needed body, and I do think focusing it on new and novel issues can be accomplished
Yeah.
with still keeping their curiosity and engagement on new processes. I think it can be done well.
Totally.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody on this side of the table nor anyone in the legislation proposes to get rid of the ACRS.
Right.
I found the ACRS to be very valuable in many cases where the commission was struggling with a technical issue. We wanted to get that second opinion. We asked the ACRS to weigh in, and
Yeah.
and they did provide a valuable role. So I'm not criticizing the existence of the body. I do think, having done a study where we interviewed over 35 people who were former commissioners, other senior staff, that there are efficiencies that could be
Yeah.
put into that program to make them used and useful in a way that allow the agency to maintain its safety mission and not erode that independence. And I think the legislation as proposed would also achieve that goal.
Well, that's exactly what I'm leading into, because you've got 4,500 cumulative hours of reviewing and licensing permits that the NRC has done. And given that fact, do you think, just as you said, the ACRS should focus its advice on matters that the commission and staff are not familiar with, like technologies and designs that are novel and risk significant and haven't been examined before? So I assume you say yes.
Yes.
Congresswoman, could I add? I mean,
Sure.
again, ACRS is a federal advisory committee. It is a federal advisory committee with additional teeth than the typical federal advisory committee because it brings technical experts, but we shouldn't misconstrue the ACRS with the staff who are doing the diligent review.
Totally.
This advisory committee is about bringing talented individuals who have either academic or technical or industry experience in there that they can advise the commission and ultimately contribute in these spaces. but like
Exactly.
they're not a replacement for staff. And so I think that's
Totally.
why I
And
think we
I
are all in
agree.
agreement on keeping the
Stay
ACRS
in your
beginning
lane.
focused.
I have to deal with that in healthcare. Are you kidding me? Advisory committees take their own legs and start doing their own thing. So I got you.
Yes,
I understand.
and that has occurred in the past.
Well, it does. And I've got other questions, but I'll have to submit them for the record since I'm almost out of time and I don't want to go over my time, Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. Chairman, I recognize the gentleman from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here to the panel. And we shouldn't see the NRC as an obstacle to new nuclear development. It is a partner in building and preserving public trust and promoting safety, which are, I believe, very critical to allowing the industry to grow. And the NRC's work cannot happen efficiently or effectively without sufficient qualified staff. Now, Ms. Korsnick, how important is it for nuclear project developers to be working with a regulator with experienced and technically knowledgeable staff?
Yeah, I'd say it's critical, right? These developers are investing time, energy, and effort to bring some new technologies to the market. I think it was mentioned earlier, a lot of conversation happens even before you officially enter the licensing process. There's a lot of pre-application conversation that happens. It's absolutely critical that you have, competent and knowledgeable staff at the NRC to engage with these developers.
Well, I appreciate that because I see this as a function of human infrastructure that is there to work to strengthen the outcome. And we need the NRC to be able to attract and retain staff, especially in limited and highly specialized fields that require technical knowledge. Mr. Harrell, your testimony mentioned several private sector companies that are developing new nuclear projects. I think it is safe to assume that these companies will be competing with NRC for some of the same workforce. Now, I talked to all these younger students in college, and you don't hear that many going into nuclear engineering or the nuclear energy field. Are you seeing a growing competition for this specialized and limited workforce?
We are. I think we're seeing states and academic institutions invest more in their programs, and we're starting to take that. That's starting to take off, but it's stiff competition. I mean, frankly, even our organization trying to bring in new nuclear talent, it's tough. And so I think Congress was wise, both in the Advance Act and now with this bill before the committee, to give some unique hiring authorities and find new ways to compensate these folks to bring the right talent in that's necessary for this moment.
Thank you. And Dr. Huff, do you agree that, how do we get talented people with technical know-how into public service?
Yeah, I think through example and additional engagement with the academic universe, the Congress and the staff at NRC, the staff at DOE can be great examples of what it looks like to have such an excellent job as being a public servant in the career staff. And I think the more engagement those institutions like NRC and DOE have with the public, the more visible it would be to undergraduates and graduate students interested in those roles.
Thank you. And I noted in your testimony, your mentioning of NRC's University Nuclear Leadership Program. These NRC grants have supported nuclear engineering education, including at our Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, RPI, located in my district. And, I heard your exchange with Representatives Menendez and McClellan, but would you want to add anything to as to how NRC funding is essential to continue to help grow a workforce pipeline that can benefit the private sector, the Commission, and the Department of Energy?
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, that University Nuclear Leadership Program, which has continued in DOE but was on pause in NRC due to the executive order on discretionary funds, that is pivotal to the creation of new nuclear engineers. We support American citizens and American persons through those awards routinely, and it makes up a very large bulk of not only our graduate population, but also scholarships for undergraduates. And when your scholarship says this scholarship came from the NRC or came from DOE, you're much more likely to consider that place as your final career.
Well, thank you. I certainly support allowing NRC to be able to offer competitive pay to be able to recruit and retain the personnel they need to carry out their mission. The proposal before us today is a good start in that regard, but it must be said that NRC has lost nearly 500 employees, as we've heard earlier today, since the beginning of the Trump administration, and competitive pay is only part of that story. And it's important for members across the aisle to recognize how big of a disaster DOGE was. What were once seen as stable, fulfilling careers in public service now have this black mark against them because we have real, recent evidence that these jobs can be upended with no notice and no respect to federal employees. And that will inevitably make it more difficult to recruit that next generation of NRC and DOE Office of Nuclear Energy staff. So, Dr. Huff, I'm guessing you may have stayed in touch with some former colleagues at the Department of Energy. Can you explain how the uncertainty and disrespect caused by actions of DOGE have damaged employee morale?
I will say a number of them took the prerogative to leave DOE at their own volition shortly after the change of administration, and part of it certainly was morale. But my understanding is that DOE is doing very well and is especially excited about some of the new initiatives, but that can't hold up some of the still empty positions, especially in leadership.
I appreciate that. So
Gentlemen.
with that, I thank you, Mr. Chair. and
Gentleman's
yield back.
time has expired, so the chair now recognizes the gentleman from the great state of Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hear nothing but positive stuff about the NRC, about the way that they're doing business, about the way that they are evaluating things. I mean, Mr. Merrifield, we hear a lot from the other side of the aisle on this, like, oh, the sky is falling, but NRC seems to be doing pretty good right now.
There actually has been an enabling of some of folks who were more junior in the workforce. They've been elevated. They've shown an incredible enthusiasm about trying to re-energize the agency in alignment with congressionally authorized Advance Act. I think there's a lot of good things going on over there. I understand the concerns, and I understand some of the comments that were made early on about a rubber stamp. I've seen no evidence that the NRC is a rubber stamp.
Doesn't seem like that's true in any way, shape, or form. I'll stick with you. I want to talk about Abilene Christian's molten salt reactor. I've been working very closely along with other people, both sides of the aisle here on this committee. Very proud of what they're doing. And what additional things need to happen to achieve criticality on the project?
Yeah, for the sake of openness, I am an advisor to Abilene Christian University. It is a terrific school. Phil Schubert, the president, has done an extraordinary job of bringing forward a nuclear program in a university that never had one. They received really assurances during the first Trump administration that it would be support for that program by the Department of Energy. Based on that, they went ahead and they built a facility that would house their reactor. It is complete, all but the reactor itself and the control room. The issue that they're having is availability of molten salt that was provided by the Department of Energy. They wanted to have provision of highly enriched uranium or high assay low enriched uranium to fuel that reactor. That is underway. There is a gap, and the gap is that there is the need for roughly $50 million to provide the preparation of that material for use in the reactor. That has traditionally been a role of the university program at DOE. There's a lot of money that has been deployed for providing HALEU and fuel for others. They are in a catch-22. They're told, well, we really want to support you, but there's not enough money in the university program to do that. There are other monies available. I think it's a crying shame. I think a small university has made a huge commitment based on government assurances, and frankly, the government's letting them down right now.
That's exactly what we're working on. This isn't public money. This is private money that was invested here.
That's correct.
At the request of the Department of Energy 7 or 8 years ago. They've done this and gone through these steps. So we're going to keep working on that. I'm going to go to
but I think the important point is every other university research reactor out there receives fuel from the Department of Energy. Abilene Christian should be no exception.
That's a great point. Thank you for that. Mr. Harrell, good to see you. Can you maybe discuss the importance of the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program in helping its first-of-a-kind projects move across from the concept to deployment phase?
Absolutely. Thank you, Congressman, and thanks for your support for programs like it that are critical to demonstrating an initial reactor design. So ARDP ultimately catalyzed during the first term of the Trump administration, carried forward by the Biden administration. Congress continues to put the resources behind it to make it happen, is putting leading designs forward, putting them under construction and ultimately showing their feasibility. So then we can show and learn by doing, and then ultimately build out an order book for it. And so really excited in particular about the Texas project, X Energy and Seadrift, that's benefiting from it, and it's driving forward their fuel supply chain as well.
Just of the reforms that are being discussed here today, what is the most important one? And after you answer, I'll ask our other two witnesses the same thing, but what is the most important one?
I would say maybe two things. So one, we have to maximize the federal taxpayer dollars that we're already putting forward. This Congress has put upwards of $3 billion behind enrichment. So I think the American Enrichment Deployment Act makes a ton of sense. We need to meet that Russia timeline. We have to stay at speed. It's a national security imperative. And then two, I think the efficient hearings bill to get rid of the mandatory requirement is a no-brainer. It takes a spot out of the process that is not necessary if there's an uncontested hearing. That's exactly the type of thing where we can reduce regulatory boredom at zero sacrifice to safety.
Thank you. That's the name of the game. Ms. Korsnick?
Yeah, thank you. I would agree with his assessment on the American Enrichment Deployment Act. I think, that's urgent and necessary to move forward. It's hard on the other ones. Everybody does a bit of tweaking, here and there. I don't know that I have a close second. The Hearing Act that he picked is easy. Even the NRC agrees that the mandatory hearings should be changed. So it can't get easier than that.
Ms. Huff, I ran out of time, but if you agree with those, or if
I
you
agree.
disagree,
And I think the Refuel Act is important too, because I love recycling.
and if you'd like to follow up on anything in writing on that, we'd be happy with that. Mr. Chairman, thank you. You'll back.
Gentleman yields back. Chairman recognizes the gentlelady from Washington for at least 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all of our witnesses. As we pursue expansion of nuclear power, Russia has 45% of the world's uranium enrichment capacity, and the U.S. only has one enrichment plant. With the ban on Russian imports set to start in 2028, it's extremely urgent, as many of you have mentioned, that we accelerate our domestic enrichment capacity to ensure energy security for us and our allies. I am encouraged that this committee is discussing these bills, including the American Enrichment Deployment Act. This bill intends to more efficiently license domestic enrichment facilities by bringing the licensing process for enrichment in line with the process for other fuels, which are allowed to start construction at their own risk before the issuance of a license, just knowing that they will be shut down or delayed if they are not in compliance. And I brought this up with NRC Commissioner Weaver at a previous hearing, and he was supportive of this reform in concept. So now it's just a matter of getting this language exactly right to make sure that the outcome matches the intent. Commissioner Merrifield, thank you for your testimony and the acknowledgement of a sort of a changing situation and your perceptions. Widespread deployment of advanced reactors is just around the corner. What happens if we don't have sufficient domestic enrichment capabilities here in the U.S.?
If we do not have the ability to provide high assay low enriched uranium for some of these advanced reactors, it will hinder their deployment. We simply will not. We will be able to build the reactors, but not have the fuel to do it. I think there's been extraordinary progress in this area. I would say there's one other thing that I would posit for you. We have a problem right now in providing uranium for U.S. content. Virtually all of that we have comes from abroad. For the civilian fleet, that's not as big a problem. For the U.S. military and the Navy, which are beginning to spin up their own enrichment programs, that has to be U.S. sourced. We need more attention to that as well.
Thank you. And that is also on this committee's watch and agenda. I wanted to thank you for that comment. I wanted to turn to nuclear licensing now. Reforming the licensing hearing process is another way that we can streamline licensing for fuel production in nuclear reactors. And when no one is even contesting the approval of a license for a project, NRC is currently still required to hold a hearing that takes thousands of man hours to prepare for. My bill with Representative Griffith solves this issue by only requiring hearing when the issue is contested. And it allows the NRC staff to really focus their energy where it should be, which is on disputed applications. Mandatory uncontested hearings have already slowed down the licensing of 3 advanced nuclear reactors where there is zero opposition. 3 more have submitted license applications and will still need a hearing, again, even if there's no opposition to the projects. Dropping this hearing requirement when no one can test the project just seems like a smart thing to do.
Yes.
Seeing nodding with all of our witnesses. Now, I just want to make certain that we still preserve the public's ability to request a contested hearing if they want one. So, Ms. Korsnick, this question's for you. The NRC in March proposed a rule that might change the public's ability to do so. Do your member companies believe this proposed rule would change or discourage public engagement or opposition to a project, or limit access to information so that they would know whether to contest a project?
Yeah, just to be clear, the mandatory hearings don't even engage the public. So the mandatory hearings happen at the end of the process and the public's not invited. So that's how crazy this mandatory hearing is. When we say it has no impact on public engagement, it's because they're not invited to it. So there's like zero pain by having this mandatory hearing not happen. To your point, earlier in the process, the public is invited, there's all kinds of opportunity, and to your point, no, this will have no impact on the public having that ability to have a hearing process, a contested process. They use this term mandatory hearing. It's simply at the end of the process, an NRC only process that they named mandatory hearing. So you have the feeling that somehow the public's involved, and they're not.
Congressman, I was a member of a commission 20 years ago that called for elimination of that requirement. I'm very supportive of what you're trying to do. I agree with everything that Maria just said. I would also say, frankly, the agency's trying to do some workarounds relative to how those are undertaken. Legislation is important. This is a great fix.
Thank you for your comments. I just want to make sure that we streamline and also protect public interest and the ability to speak up and contest if there is a problem. Thank you. I yield
Absolutely.
back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the panel for being here. Ms. Korsnick, I was very much liked the executive summary of your testimony, so thank you for that. You mentioned in answer to a previous question that you would allow construction to a point under the American Enrichment Deployment Act. I think I understand what you're saying, but why don't you explain to me how you would select that point?
Yeah, basically you can do site preparation, you can do certain things, but you can't move forward by bringing special nuclear material on site. You can't actually begin enriching without a license. So the stuff that you can do in advance is construction type work, but not any operation or receiving of.
It seems
fuel
that
products.
other witnesses on the panel, Ms. Huff,
And let me, I used to work for after I left the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I went to work for the Shaw Group. We built the Urenco facility for enrichment out in New Mexico. Those buildings are relatively straightforward civil construction. It's a pad, it looks a lot like a commercial building. The safety significant issues are really the centrifuges themselves and how they're piped together. So that non-safety significant work can continue. It's not going to have an impact on public health. Obviously, it's done at the risk of the applicant, but I think the common sense reforms included in the legislation make sense.
right. So it seemed to me that Ms. Huff, for example, suggested in her testimony, written testimony, that there could be a problem in bringing pressure on the agency because it had allowed the facility to go forward and then would be in no position to say stop. And that's an estoppel argument. I'm a lawyer. I know how that works. But forgive me. I have to move on. And but I appreciate.
I would respectfully disagree with that viewpoint.
Well, you're in a position to do so. You're an expert. But since I have
No,
you,
I mean with the viewpoint expressed by my good friend.
let me
Dr. Huff.
shift over to the Crane Clean Energy Center, formerly known as 3 Mile Island. I've read reports regarding the rejuvenation of that facility, but there seemed to be some concern that once it gets up and going, there will be additional unforeseen costs that somehow the public ratepayers or the taxpayer would end up paying. Who's in charge of making sure that doesn't happen?
Well, I I don't know all the details that entail your question. I would say there's sort of two pieces. The NRC has under its authority the regulation of the reactor and to make sure that before it goes into operation that it is safe. You have an economic regulator potentially in the state that would have authority over how that cost is shifted to ratepayers. And so those are really two different arenas. From an NRC federal standpoint, as an NRC regulator, I mean, ultimately, we were mindful of the costs that we imposed, but we did not reduce our safety mission for that reason. I mean, if it needed to be done for safety purposes, the NRC required it to be implemented. I don't think that's changed.
I'm not sure if that answers the question, but it seemed to me that someone should be looking into the rebuilding of these facilities and the enthusiasm that seems to accompany the initial investment when we need 30 or 40 years to actually pay the thing back, and recognizing that it's an older facility seems to me to be something we should be concerned about, at least the ratepayer should. I want to go back to Ms. Korsnick for several more questions. I'm looking at your second bullet point, accelerate new nuclear deployment by, quote, addressing early project cost and schedule risk, and thus enabling private sector investment. I don't understand that. Can you explain?
Yeah, I would say it's hard to go first in nuclear. It's hard to have the first of a kind build, and there's additional risk associated with the fact because it hasn't been built yet. And so private investment is taking a look and they're wanting to have more confidence. And so one of the things that has been proposed, the ARC Act, is to help have a government participate in risk sharing. So you can imagine if you're running a project, the first part is on the owner, then there's a second part after, say, 20%, that there would be some government private sector risk sharing to a capped limit, after which it would be back all on the owner. So some structure that would send a signal to the private investment that that early mover risk is being reduced, it's being ameliorated. And this isn't for all of them. This is just maybe for the first few of a kind, so that it could demonstrate. Then that private sector money comes in. They see what the cost is, they see what the schedule is, they understand.
Thank you for that clarification. And thank all of you for your testimony. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now the chair now recognizes a gentleman from the great state of Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Chair, I want to first of all say I'm proud to be the co-sponsor of both 5549 and 3978. I don't think that this is a partisan issue at all. I believe that advanced nuclear energy is going to be very essential to a reliable, affordable, a cleaner grid. And frankly, the Chinese or the Russians or any other adversaries, they're not going to wait around for us to get our regulatory act in order. They're going to be moving ahead, and we need to make sure that we're doing the same thing. And I think that 5549 is a very sensible fix to what we need to do. The mandatory hearings on uncontested applications consume a lot of hours of NRC staff and adds on about an average time of about 6 months. And that's just unacceptable. 3978, I think, clears real ambiguity standing in the way of domestic recycling technology that could go a really long way in helping us reduce waste and strengthen our fuel security. I think both of these reforms have been called for across administrations and across party lines. And that said, I want to be direct, though. I think that everything that we're trying to accomplish here, the deployment, the investment, the international credibility, it really rests on one foundation, and that's a credible NRC. Not independent as a political talking point, but independent as a structural reality. Dr. Huff said, well, in her testimony that regulatory independence is most important when significant financial interests are at stake. And so now we're talking about billions of dollars at stake. And I think the committee that we have to make sure that we have efficiency reforms that don't inadvertently erode the credibility that makes American nuclear regulation the global gold standard, that don't erode that standard that we have here. And so, Dr. Huff, I wanted to ask you, because I am a co-sponsor of 5549, and I believe the case for these efficiency reforms are strong, but you raised something in your testimony that I wanted to explore further, and you noted that the ACRS has contributed to safety review of virtually every generation of commercial reactor technology that we've deployed, and that independent expertise is valuable when it's empowered to disagree. My question is about the implementation. As the NRC executes this reform, what should this committee be watching to make sure that the commission is actively and appropriately using ACRS, not just technically complying with the law?
Thank you so much, Congressman. I really appreciate it. I think especially your comments with regard to financial pressure on NRC get back to Congressman Bence's concern with my testimony, which was intended to suggest that a redress plan may be a helpful component of that law. Moving on to your comments about the ACRS, I think everyone on this panel agrees it's valuable in precisely this way, that it provides a technical sort of second opinion for the staff for this oversight of all reactors. In terms of the efficiencies, I think it's been made clear that reducing the amount of unnecessary meetings that either NRC or ACRS has is great, but remaining flexible with regard to what ACRS believes is important, if they feel strongly that there is a technical concern to be addressed, I think enshrining in law that they can't ask that question kind of goes against some of the intent for providing their technical expertise. In many ways, technical expertise sometimes comes in the form of a question.
Yeah. I know you also flagged that the NRC has paused its discretionary grant programs, the undergraduate scholarships, the graduate fellowships, the community college assistance, the faculty advancement grants, and you said that that was unsustainable, and I agree. I think that that's not good at all for us trying to make sure that we're winning a competition. The pay bill addresses one in the pipeline. Who addresses the other? And should this committee be asking the NRC directly why those grants are paused at exactly the moment we need to be expanding the technical workforce? Because that's an area where I've heard a lot of bipartisan agreement, is that this technical workforce is hugely important.
Thank you, Congressman. Indeed, it's baffling to have those grants on pause. They were the result of an executive order associated with oversight on discretionary granting across the agencies, and the NRC still hasn't released those awards from FY24. DOE has moved forward many of those sort of awards under the same program in UNLP, the University Nuclear Leadership Program, and it has been baffling for the university community to see NRC not follow suit.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vesey. The chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Fry, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing today. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. I'm glad to see that this subcommittee is still continuing to focus intently on nuclear energy. As I've said before, the nuclear renaissance is here, and I believe that South Carolina has an important role to play in that. I support the efforts to improve the timeliness and predictability of nuclear regulatory commission licensing decisions, which are essential to advancing next generation nuclear technologies and strengthening grid reliability. At the same time, I'm equally focused on ensuring that new nuclear development is cost effective for customers. I have had ongoing discussions with groups like Duke Energy and the Palmetto Nuclear Coalition and other stakeholders about how to better manage and contain project costs. We have to take the lessons of South Carolina, specifically VC Summer, seriously by ensuring that future projects are structured so as not to place an undue financial burden on taxpayers and the ratepayers of the Carolinas, or really the United States. This is particularly important as Duke Energy actively evaluates the potential development of new reactors in South Carolina, and the state continues to consider pathways for the partially completed VC Summer units. With that said, nuclear projects are certainly capital intensive, but operate for many decades, with some lasting 80 years. Unfortunately, as I talked about before, VC Summer shows that cost overruns and delays can have real big impacts on projects, oftentimes resulting in the abandonment of those projects, which saddled ratepayers with the cost of nuclear plants that actually weren't producing anything because they didn't exist. All of this, I think, has scared investors, probably, away from nuclear right when we need it most. Mr. Harrell, how can the bills that we discussed today, and you talked about a little bit about this earlier in your testimony, but how can these bills, which are focused on regulatory modernization, help companies with financing?
Yeah, time is money, Congressman. And so in the end, a predictable, efficient permitting process that the public has confidence in and that has strong safety protocols in place is good for innovation. It's good for deployment. Investors want to know that there's a schedule that's going to be followed, even on long lead items like nuclear that are going to take longer than maybe your traditional investments, that they want to know that process is moving efficiently.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Ms. Korsnick, turning to spent nuclear fuel and our nuclear waste policy, you note in your testimony that we should advance an integrated fuel management and recycling strategy that preserves ratepayer interest and federal contractual obligations. Can you elaborate on what you mean here, especially about preserving ratepayer interests?
Well, yeah, ratepayers have paid in to a fund directed from the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. And when they paid that money, it was for long-term storage, a deep geologic repository. And so we think that recycling is a wonderful addition. We think it's part of closing the fuel cycle. We just want to ensure that the money that ratepayers put away specifically for the purpose of long-term deep geologic repository is spent in that way. And so those are the conversations, if you will, that are playing out now.
South Carolina ratepayers, from what I can see, have contributed with interest about $3 billion to the Nuclear Waste Fund. Should we make sure that this fund is used for credible, durable policies to address that nuclear waste?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, I think the move towards recycling starts with, I'll say small scale, then it has to get raised to commercial scale. There's a lot, I would say, to learn and to discover. And so we just need to be thoughtful about what part of that ratepayers pay for.
Thank you for that. The Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards was formed at a time when almost all nuclear technology was new, and there was a need to have maybe a variety of expert advice. That's not necessarily the case today. I think some of your testimony has exhibited that with the NRC. Do you agree with that, Mr. Merrifield?
I absolutely do agree with that. I think they serve a valuable purpose, but if we were to have more AP1000s built in South Carolina, that technology is well understood. Having ACRS review those would be, to me, a waste of time.
Ms. Korsnick, do you agree with that as well?
Yeah, I think the ACRS plays a role. I think we can do it more efficiently.
But we should anticipate, I think, that there would be new designs, technologies, and other matters that would still benefit the NRC and the public through this outside expert review and public comments. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you're going to cut me off here in a second, and I'm not going to like it at all. I have more questions, but I really appreciate y'all's time today. Thank you for being here.
I've got a big gavel here to cut you off, Mr. Fry.
Thank you.
Of course, a Texan would have a big gavel.
That's exactly right. Thank you, Mr. Fry. Chair recognizes a gentlewoman from North Dakota, Ms. Fedorchak, for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my colleague from Colorado for letting me jump ahead of him in line. Appreciate that. Thank you all for being here to share your expertise on such an important topic. I watched as a state utility regulator 10 to 12 years ago. I watched our country turn away from nuclear, regrettably, and it's really encouraging to see how quickly we're pivoting back. A lot to do with all of your leadership and then some of the great work that has happened here in Congress in the last five or so years. Mr. Harrell, North Dakota is a state without nuclear. We have a lot of coal-fired power. We have a lot of gas. We have a lot of oil and gas development. We have a lot of wind generation. So we are an all of the above state, except for we don't have any nuclear assets. There's a lot of interest in that, and there's discussions happening. But can you talk a little bit about the changes that are being proposed with some of the legislation we're talking about today, and talk about how you think that'll help states like North Dakota sort of pursue nuclear resources, nuclear power development in the future?
Absolutely. Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. And I think it's spot on, because I think there are a lot of states like North Dakota who, in this moment, want to explore adding nuclear into their mix. I think the reforms on the bills of today continue to reinforce that there's a predictable regulatory process that includes public participation, so that your constituents can have confidence both in the technical aspects of the technology, as well as be certain that ultimately these projects can deliver power in a relevant time frame as you all wrestle with rising demand in North Dakota. I also think that you're seeing states that want to be fast followers here on these first of a kind, do things like feasibility studies, siting and permitting work, workforce development areas. A couple states like Ohio and Virginia have established nuclear authorities to try to foster these opportunities. I think that's the type of thing that North Dakota could do. And then as Korsnick referenced earlier, I mean, we got to get regulators like your previous self over the hump. And so policies like the ARC Act are the type of things that can ensure that the project 2, 3, 4 of a new design gets off the ground, that we share the risk on that, and regulators can have confidence that that ultimately is going to be a good return for the taxpayer and be a long-term investment for the state's energy future.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Ms. Korsnick, increased nuclear capacity means increased use of uranium fuels. As a country and a legislative body, we've encountered issues finding places to store our spent fuel. Can you describe how a built-out nuclear recycling supply chain limits the need to find and house spent fuel in a natural repository?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So in a recycling process, you take some of that used fuel and you actually use it again to feed a reactor as new fuel. And so as you could continue to do that, you could lower the volume of fuel that you have that needs to be stored. That's a long-term vision. And so it's going to take us a while to commercialize and scale up the idea of recycling. But that's in the main, the reason that it is helpful to close the fuel cycle is because you can use today what is used fuel and turn it into new fuel for a reactor.
So the goal of getting a long-term repository has been something that has been out of reach for quite a while. Do you think it's realistic that we might get the refueling process in place faster than a permanent storage solution?
Actually, I think you need the whole picture. Even with recycling, you still need a geologic repository. Maybe that's boreholes, maybe it's a mined repository. I think it's probably a combination of those. So please don't think that it's one or the other. It's really both.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the industry has really moved forward in this area, both recycling and other alternative means of disposing of fuel. We have the world's first nuclear repository that's open in Finland. More movement's been made, so we haven't been gathering dust.
Okay, I've got 30 seconds left. What else can this body do to support this effort, both on the permanent and the recycling processes?
I think the Nuclear Refuel Act is a good step forward in terms of bringing attention to it. As I mentioned earlier, would actually like to broaden it to all recycling and reprocessing methods to be considered non-production facilities and be licensed under Part 70, which is meant for fuel facilities. I think that would be appropriate for all technologies.
Okay, my time has expired. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Evans, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chair, Ranking Member. Thank you, of course, to the witnesses for taking some time to come out and talk to us today. I'm from Colorado. We know what's happening. Energy demand is rising rapidly. I've got utilities in my district that are expecting to triple demand in the next 10 years, and that's after already doubling it in the last 10 years. And unfortunately, the energy policies in Colorado right now, not my numbers, the Democrat-controlled Colorado Energy Office say that their plan to get to net zero emissions is going to cost $60 billion plus. And as we're doing that, they're actually making less electricity per federal data, 58,000 gigawatt hours 2 years ago and only 56,000 gigawatt hours this year. So people are paying more money for less electricity, less reliable electricity. And one of the ways we can fix that is with nuclear. It's baseload dispatchable, it's very low emissions, it helps keep prices stable, prevents blackouts, preemptive shutouts, and permitting reform is an essential piece of being able to bring this energy back onto the grid. I've been proud to work on a bipartisan permitting reform framework with some of my colleagues actually on this committee and across the aisle, Mr. Peters being one. Which has got the support of about 50 bipartisan members of Congress. And one of the things in that platform is eliminating the uncontested mandatory NRC hearings for new reactors. And that's reflected in one of the bills before us today, Mr. Griffith's bill. And in previous conversations, experts have testified that that could reduce permitting timelines by 6 months without compromising public safety or engagement. And so I'm super excited to see this bill moving. My first question to Mr. Harrell is going to be to you. We've got innovation happening all over the nation and even in the state of Colorado. Buckley Air Force Base or Space Force Base, they're under a Department of War contract to bring microreactor technology in my district. We've got the old Fort St. Vrain nuclear plant, which has now got nuclear storage for about 33,000 pounds of spent fuel. And so, Mr. Harrell, what's the current status of the NRC's major rulemakings under the Trump administration? And how did today's proposals help build on that so we can actually get nuclear technology on the grid?
Yeah, it's a great question, Congressman, and thank you for your leadership on permit reform. Beyond the things that are nuclear specific here, we need to be modernizing our grid and really bringing new generation of all types to the marketplace quickly to meet rising demand. On the NRC side, we are in a critical moment, right? A lot of the regulatory actions that have moved or have come forth in the last 3 months have been a result of your all's bipartisan leadership over the last 10 years, from NEMA, from the ADVANCE Act. And so we're now seeing those come to fruition, and there's some real world examples of where we're seeing results coming from those type of reforms. I mean, I would underscore in Texas, the X Energy project, without the work that you all did over the last 5 years, there is no way the NRC would have ultimately landed on an NEA for that project and do the environmental in under 12 months. And then these bills build on that type of momentum, right? We need to keep plugging forward and showing the marketplace that we've got a regulator that's nimble, that's predictable, that is diligent, and that is ultimately going to put U.S. nuclear leadership in the forefront.
Thank you for that. Mr. Merrifield, I'm going to come to you next, Chairman. I mentioned that 33,000 pounds of spent fuel that we have in my district in Colorado. And so part of this whole nuclear conversation, of course, involves the supply chains, from being able to produce the fuels, mill and refine the fuels, use them, but then obviously, what's the end of life cycle for those fuels? And so the question to you today, and I know we've already talked about it some, but if there's anything to add about what is the legislation today that we're talking about, or are there other things that we need to talk about to help the U.S. establish that complete fuel cycle, specifically including that end of life fuel, and can modern technology help reuse that?
I think the legislation today is going to be helpful in helping to spur innovation in recycling of used nuclear fuel. There are, by my count, probably 7 or 8 different companies out there that are pursuing different types of potential recycling of that material. As Maria described, it would really help utilize that material in a very appropriate way. And frankly, the massive amount of energy that it still contains would be something that could help power our nation's future nuclear fleet. So that's an area I think we will see more coming out of the NRC. We'll see more that probably Congress will need to assist in that area. It's quite exciting. I do think we need to put some attention to the front end of the fuel cycle, uranium production, conversion, having sufficient enrichment. All of these pieces come together for us to be able to build and sustain a nuclear fleet.
I also will get gavelled if I keep going, so I'm out of time and will yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. The chair recognizes Dr. Joyce from Pennsylvania for his 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Castor, for holding this important hearing. And thank you for our witnesses for being here today. Recently, I had the opportunity to travel with Chairman Latta, as well as other colleagues from the Energy Subcommittee, on a bipartisan congressional delegation to France looking at their nuclear energy. There we heard from companies and government officials on how successful their expansion and use of nuclear energy has been. Since their large-scale expansion plan started in the mid-1970s, France has transformed themselves from an energy importer to an energy exporter, bolstering their economy while also relying on nuclear generation for a significant portion of their domestic energy needs. As we talk about achieving American energy dominance, I believe we can learn from the efforts in France. Already in places like my home state of Pennsylvania, we are seeing the expansion of nuclear generation. Just over 100 miles from where we're sitting here today, Constellation Energy is well on their way to bringing the Crane Clean Energy Center back online. America has an advantage over France, though. Vast fossil fuel resources like the natural gas that is underneath the feet of my constituents. This will allow us to even further leverage nuclear energy as it is brought online to improve our electrical grid and ensure reliable and affordable energy for all Americans. Ms. Korsnick, you mentioned in your testimony the momentum that is building up behind the deployment of new nuclear generation assets. How would the regulatory reforms under consideration today help bolster that momentum?
Yeah, it's, I'd say critical because it brings that regulatory predictability. And Mr. Harrell has mentioned that a few times today. If you want investment in nuclear, you have to demonstrate that you're going to take that great idea and it's going to actually turn into a power plant. It's going to turn into energy and it's going to get on the grid. Or it's going to turn into high temperature steam and it's going to go to your factory and it's going to be put to use. And so the ambiguity around nuclear starts in the regulatory process. How long is it actually going to take for me to get that license or that construction permit? So the things that you're focused on here helps bring that predictability, which is crucial.
Is that ambiguity that you talk about, does that stifle innovation? Does that stifle the progress that is so necessary?
Well, yeah, because it just takes too long to get to the marketplace, right? Innovation feeds on, I not only had the great idea, but I turned the great idea into a widget that works that I can bring to the marketplace. Well, if you can't get it to the marketplace, clearly it stifles.
You mentioned the success of executive orders in helping improve regulations. Do you agree that codified regulatory reforms would provide further confidence for developers to invest in upgrades and new deployments of nuclear assets?
Absolutely.
Mr. Merrifield, do you agree that ensuring any regulatory improvements apply both to new nuclear generation and restarting or upgrading existing assets will aid the expansion of nuclear capacity of the grid?
Yes.
Mr. Harrell, can you discuss how effectively deploying nuclear energy domestically can ultimately affect United States' global competitiveness?
Absolutely, sir. We have to first learn by, or have to do first, right? And show the globe that we can build these reactors and designs and demonstrate these technologies. But in the end, the diplomatic partnerships that happen in nuclear are a century-long agreement. And China and Russia are going on offense on that. We're seeing those countries ultimately go to partners who are interested in nuclear, an immense amount of countries showing interest in new nuclear because of what it can bring to them for energy security. And they're offering fuel take back. They're offering investments in the technology to build out. They're even willing to staff it in many cases. We're never going to out-subsidize China, but what we can do is use better technology and ultimately the tools that we have in our tool belt, whether that's the Export-Import Bank of the US, which is up for reauthorization, the great work that Congress recently did in a bipartisan way to reauthorize the Development Finance Corporation, and other tools in the tool belt to provide US offerings and ultimately be competitive on the market.
Well, you talk about China and Russia both being on the offense. Is it time that we get off the sidelines and implement and allow the regulations to step aside so we can become part of that game again?
It's a national security imperative for lead. I wouldn't say that we need to step away from the regulations. We need to show that we're a diligent, efficient regulator and that the rest of the globe can trust the diligence we've done on U.S.
As we watch momentum build in the nuclear domain, I look forward to working with this committee to ensure that federal regulations are aligned with industry realities so that we can all benefit from affordable, reliable energy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to wave on, and I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Joyce. The chair recognized myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Seeing how there's no one left here right now, that means someone may walk in. But Mr. Merrifield, can I follow up with you? I know Mr. Pfluger from Texas talked about the SMR in Abilene, and you mentioned your involvement with it. Can you follow up on that? I understand there is a bump in the road that we hope to rectify quickly, but let's talk about nationally. What other SMRs are out there? I think we're all in agreement that that is a future. That's something we're all excited about, both on the Republican and Democrat side. So what other SMRs out there, and how close are we for them to come online?
Well, I think there's a lot of movement we're seeing. You have TerraPower, which has its site in Kemmerer, Wyoming, that's under construction. X Energy, which is a high temperature gas, is moving forward well with the Cedar site in Texas. I think a number of states have announced movement forward. We've got the restart of the Palisades plant, the Crane Energy Center announcement of Dwayne Arnold in Iowa, which were previously considered reactors. State of South Carolina has an effort underway right now with trying to bring Summer Unit 2 and 3, which were the Westinghouse reactors that started, getting them back on board. I've talked to, I talked to a utility executive of a large nuclear utility very recently. They had brought in experts to look at, do we go with gas, do we go with nuclear, and they realized they really have to go with nuclear. So a lot of movement, all the advanced reactor work being done by DOE and elsewhere, really bringing things forward. So there's a huge amount of activity underway.
And so that's great news. How far do you think we are from cities being powered by SMRs?
Well, I think some of the micro reactors are quite far along, and I think because they are smaller and easier to deploy, I think we'll see some of those put on the grid quicker. A large gigawatt size reactor like a Westinghouse AP1000, you order one today, it's going to take you probably 7 or 8 years to get it up and operating with all the approvals and requirements and whatnot. So, but I think we're making real progress. The other thing I would just mention quickly.
Sure.
Ontario has GE BWX 300s that are under construction right now. Those were developed in Wilmington, North Carolina by GE Vernova. We're going to see more of those in the U.S. as well.
And I was going to follow up with, are the economics there for them to compete, let's say, with natural gas?
Nuclear is a higher upfront investment, in part because of the interest costs. But I think if you look at the long range value of nuclear, it beats everything, including gas, over the long range.
Thank you very much. I'm going to yield back the balance of my time. I'll recognize Mr. Griffith for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for letting me wave on. Sorry I haven't been here earlier. I was out doing other things, but and I'm not a regular member of the subcommittee. I'm waving on. It used to be, and it's a great sub. But one of the bills the subcommittee is discussing the bill is a bill that Dr. Schreier, Representative Easy, and myself introduced, HR 6464, the Efficient Nuclear Licensing Hearings Act. And our bill amends the Atomic Energy Act to repeal the requirements for mandatory nuclear licensing hearings. Mr. Harrell, do you believe that these hearings actually contribute to stopping unsafe reactor designs?
No, I do not. They're at the end of the process when they're uncontested, and so by eliminating it, we've already had the diligence by the NRC before.
It's kind of duplicative, and it's something that's hung around since, what, 1957? And if nobody asks for it, it really doesn't do much. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And this would make things a little streamlined then without sacrificing any safety, correct?
Exactly. It could save thousands of hours of preparation that happened by NRC staff, up to $1 million for this process, and delays application approvals by 6 months on average.
So it causes delays, it runs up costs, and it has no net benefit for the public.
Exactly.
Sounds like a good bill. I'm glad I introduced it.
Thank you.
Ms. Korsnick, when we talk about mandatory hearings, nuclear reactor applicants have to pay the NRC engineering staff to examine its application by the hour. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And so that's kind of the cost we were talking about. Isn't that accurate? When we have these extra hearings that are not beneficial?
Absolutely. It runs that cost needlessly.
And how much does an applicant pay the commission staff per hour to examine its application? Not sure.
No, I think it's on the order of $300 an hour.
300, 325 in that range per hour per staff.
So not quite Philadelphia lawyer fees, but higher than your average worker in the 9th Congressional District of Virginia.
Well, and when you have a dozen NRC staffers sitting around a table, it adds up quick.
Yeah. So you're talking 300 plus and times 12, or
that's right,
8 or 15. All right.
And by the way, the NRC, I was a commissioner. We called for the elimination of these hearings over 20 years ago. This is long overdue.
Does anybody disagree with that? I mean, I'll give the naysayers a chance.
Even the NRC agrees.
All right. Well, Mr. Chairman, it sounds like, without using up my whole 5 minutes, that everybody's in agreement that the bill that Dr. Schreier, Representative Veazey, and myself introduced, HR 6464, ought to move forward. And I appreciate their testimony and their time here today, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. The chair recognizes Congresswoman Miller Meeks from Iowa for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank Representative Griffith for waving on. The current increased rates that people are experiencing right now are due to 4 years of a deterrence of energy generation and energy subtraction from the Biden administration. So let me also say that Iowans and Americans are very appreciative of this hearing. The United States is entering a new era of nuclear deployment, and the institutions responsible for licensing and oversight must be ready to meet it. Advanced reactors are moving from concept to construction. Retired plants are seeking to restart, such as the one in Iowa, and domestic fuel infrastructure is being rebuilt from the ground up after decades of atrophy. Congress has a narrow window to remove the remaining friction to clear the procedural backlog that slows restart applications, align enrichment licensing with the rest of the fuel cycle, and make sure the NRC has the staff to handle what is coming. The opportunity is real, but it's not going to wait indefinitely. Mr. Merrifield, you've been calling for the elimination of mandatory uncontested hearings since your time on the commission, and you support refocusing the ACRS on genuinely novel, safety significant issues. Duane Arnold is a proven boiling water reactor with decades of operational history. There's nothing novel about the technology and nothing contested about the community's desire to see it back online. Can you tell us concretely how much time and cost these two reforms together could save a restart applicant like NextEra? And is there any safety justification for requiring either a mandatory uncontested hearing or a full ACRS review for a plant that was operating safely just 5 years ago?
I would say in this case, I don't think either one is necessary. In terms of the total savings, it would likely range, in the millions of dollars, and certainly significant time both on the part of the NRC and of the applicant. Now, I would put one caveat. There may be a unique circumstance that could be identified where the commission might want to have the ACRS look at it. This legislation would not at all impose on the ability to do that if the commission felt that review was needed.
So safety for the community would certainly be paramount in that situation.
Safety is paramount. I don't think this legislation does anything to erode that.
Mr. Harrell, the conversation around nuclear energy is often framed as an energy policy issue, but increasingly it's also a matter of economic competitiveness, supply chain resilience, and national security. Today, Russia remains the dominant supplier in the global nuclear market, providing reactor technology, fuel services, financing, and long-term operational support to countries around the world. China is making significant investments to expand its nuclear footprint as part of a broader strategy to increase its economic and geopolitical influence. Given that reality, can you discuss why domestic deployment matters for American leadership abroad? Specifically, how does American success strengthen the ability of the U.S. companies to compete globally and provide allies with an alternative to Russia and China suppliers?
Yeah, first and foremost, I think we've got the premier technologies here, and folks want to work with the U.S. But the critical issue at the moment is we need to be able to deploy here, and we need to be able to deploy efficiently. The NRC is a critical regulator that is recognized globally, so success going through that process is instrumental in confidence in doing this globally as well. So we have to do here first and meet our constituents' needs, obviously, or the U.S. consumers' needs. And then we have products that we can then market abroad. Folks want to partner with the U.S. These are century-long partnerships, and they're going to have confidence in this technology as entrepreneurs and innovators are racing to the commercial marketplace.
Congressman, I was in Rwanda 2 weeks ago at a ministerial meeting hosted by the president of Rwanda, 12 countries. The message was, we want American technologies. Holtec, one I forgot to mention, a New Jersey-based company that has a 300-megawatt reactor, signed an agreement there for a cooperative agreement. That was great news. It wasn't a Chinese signing. It wasn't a Russian signing. It was an American company. That's a good thing.
Well, I was going to say, we used to be the leader in all nuclear energy and with the capacity to train nuclear engineers, and then that stopped. I have a question for Ms. Korsnick. I'm going to submit it to the record to have you answer. And Mr. Merrifield, you testified that NRCC is now more efficient, risk-informed, and results-oriented at any other point than in the past 20 years. Are restart applicants actually experiencing that cultural change in their interactions with NRC staff, or is the improvement concentrated in the advanced reactor licensing divisions while the teams handling convention license actions remain more conservative?
I think the licensing activities associated with Holtec's Palisades restart went quite well, and we're ahead of time. I would expect the lessons that the NRC staff learned from that would inure well to the benefit of the review that next year we'll have for Duane Arnold. I would expect that one would go very smoothly.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. With that, I want to thank Ranking Member Castor. We certainly want to thank all the witnesses for being here today and taking your time to spend with us. Members have additional written questions for you all. I'll remind members may have additional written questions for you all. I'll remind members they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record. And I ask that witnesses do their best to submit responses within 10 business days upon receipt of those questions. I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the documents included on the staff hearing documents list. Without objection, so ordered. Without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned.